would you do to demonstrate your love for somebody in your family? What would you do to demonstrate your love for somebody if they were a neighbor or a coworker? What would you do? Alicia baked cookies or muffins. That's a demonstration of love. Say hi to them. Give them a hug. Here's what God did to demonstrate his love. He became human. Christmas morning, I took my 2 Shih Tzus. It's Shih Tzu, not Shih Tzu. Don't pronounce it Shih Tzu. It's Shih Tzu. I took my 2 little babies down to the lake just for a walk and sat down there at the lake and was looking. The morning sun, it was early, 7 o'clock. Sun was making its way past the clouds. Christmas morning. And I just began to cry. I began to cry because of brokenness, sadness, loneliness, failure. Some of you know my backstory, and so you're connecting with that. I grabbed my little girl dog, Sophie, Soph, and I just grabbed her and held her, and rocked. And I heard God say in that moment, not only am I with you, I am you. I am your tears. I am your hug. I am holding Sophie. I walked down here, not just with you. I walked down here. See, that's part of the mystery of this whole idea that God became human. I mean, we generally theologically accept that as a distant idea, something we visit every Christmas. But I mean, God became flesh in vulnerability. I mean, think of the mystery of the manger. God comes as a fragile, speechless infant into a feed box. Talk about connecting with humanity. God didn't try to bypass the fragility of human life. He enters into it. And how profound is that? That the baby in a manger actually displays God's humility. What if there had been problems at that birth? What if there had been shoulder dystocia, nurse? Dystocia? Is that how I pronounce that? No. How do I? Birth complications. That's where the shoulders of the baby turn and they're too wide to go through the canal and the baby can stop breathing. What if there had been umbilical cord prolapse or wrap where it's around the neck and choking the baby? We're talking about God coming into human life. He could have gotten sick, trampled by an animal. Oh no, we're talking about Jesus, the Son of God. No, wait a minute. God came as a human and was born into a stable in a manger as a baby. Lots of things could have gone wrong. That was God's choice to enter our world in that way. Not in power, not in wealth, not in majesty, but in the helplessness that connects him to all humanity, including Jeff Corson sitting lakeside, holding his little Shih Tzu, crying. Do we accept God there? How do we respond to the vulnerability in others? I want to ask you this. How do you respond to the vulnerability in others, knowing that God chose to become vulnerable with us? When you go by somebody panhandling on the side of the road, does your heart have empathy? Do you reach? Do you feel more vulnerable? Do you feel more human? Do you maybe want to stop and give $1 or $2? Or is that too good for you? There's a reason they're there, and if they just would get their life together, and, lots of people have hard times. They don't wind up on the side of the road. Excuse me? Jesus said you'll always have the poor with you. And then he was made visible in suffering. God was made visible in suffering. Paul writes about this in his letter to the Philippian church, chapter 2. I'll begin in verse 5. The way Jesus saw himself is the only valid way you should see yourself. His being God's equal in form and likeness was official. His sonship did not steal the limelight from the Father. Neither did his humanity distract from the deity of God. His mission, however, was not to prove his deity, but to embrace our humanity. Stop, take a moment, breathe. His mission was not to prove his deity. He did not come in splendor and grandeur on horses and take over. He came to prove and embrace his and our humanity. Emptied of his reputation as God, he fully embraced our physical human form. Born in our resemblance, he identified himself as a servant of the human race. My goodness. God became your servant. His love enslaved him to us. And so, we have the drama of the cross in context. The man Jesus, who is fully God, becomes fully man to the extent of willing to die humanity's death at the hands of his own creation. Think of that. We, his creation, put him to death. He embraced the curse and shame of the lowest kind of dying or in dying, a criminal's death. He died a criminal between two criminals. And Francois in the Mirror Translation says, thus, through the doorway of death, he descended into our hellish darkness. I must admit, I have not known that God for decades. It's taken me into my late 50s to come to know this God, the human God that Paul writes about. It wasn't a secret. I was just listening to too many voices of our white evangelical American idea of evangelism and Christianity. In fact, the cross itself is the very pinnacle of the incarnation, God becoming human. God revealed himself in suffering and in weakness. Jesus, the convict between convicts, embodies the consequences of human violence and sin. Father Kenneth Tanner said this: God is visible among us as a convict, hanging between convicts, literally fastened to wood, immobile and defenseless, mortally wounded by hundreds of cuts and insults and he was bleeding out. This is what happens to God when God becomes visible in this fallen order of our making, made by our hands, driven by our violence. One of the thoughts that I had while sitting at the lake was, you did this. You ever thought that? And Jesus comes into that and says, no, I took this for you. You're no longer to blame. Whatever you're in the middle of, and whether you feel you caused it or not, Jesus says, whoa, wait a minute. I take even the blame. I'm guilty. I'll suffer. I come into your darkness. I come into your blackness. I come into your hurt. I go down to the lake with you. I hug your little dog, and I tell you, Jeff, I'm crazy in love with you. And nothing you could ever do will ever distance you from me, the human God. There's no God behind the convict. God is fully present in the suffering, in the brokenness. It's not God behind the convict. He is the convict. This is the God who saves, not with force, but through love and mercy and justice. We often look for God in strength and grandeur, and then overlook him in our pain and our brokenness. Paul writes again in 2 Corinthians in his letter to this church, chapter 12, verse 9, finally, it dawned on me that grace is God's language. He doesn't speak thorn language. He said to me, my grace elevates you to be fully content. And now, instead of being overwhelmed with a sense of my own weakness, he overwhelms me with an awareness of his strength. Oh, what bliss to rejoice in the fact that in the midst of my frailties, I encounter the dynamic of the grace of God to be my habitation. Verse 10, I now enjoy a delightfully different frame of mind when I encounter things that would normally make me feel frail, whether it be from insults or when I am in situations where I'm forced to do things with my arms twisted behind my back, whether I am persecuted or feel squeezed into claustrophobic spaces. Because of Christ, every time that I encounter weakness, I escape into the strength of my amness. I amness. Where do we struggle to see God in our own suffering, our own pain, our own shame, and our own guilt? I had the pleasure this Christmas, after that experience at the lake, of going to one of the most beautiful homes and families that I have ever been in. I've never had a Christmas meal like this. Mexican. Oh my gosh. I asked the cook, I said, bro, have you thought about opening up a business? You need to cater. You need to do this thing. You make a buttload of money. Oh, I know you're not supposed to say that in church. You make a lot of money. It was really good. But you know what was so splendid about those hours there? Being around the family just the way they were. Shorts, thongs, dresses, hair down, hair up, makeup, no makeup, little bit of cursing, no cursing, smoking. And I thought, this is Christmas. I would have run from that decades past. Oh, because I'm too holy. Jesus can't be in that environment because he's holy. He separates himself from sinners. No, Jesus climbs into our sin in the deepest ways. He knows your name. How do we respond to this incarnate God? How do we respond to this human God? Christ tells us, Matthew's Gospel, chapter 25, starting in verse 40, "For when you saw me hungry, you fed me. When you found me thirsty, you gave me drink. When I had no place to stay, you invited me in. And when I was poorly clothed, you covered me. When I was sick, you tenderly cared for me. And when I was in prison, you visited me." And then the godly will answer him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or give you food or something to drink? You're the glorious God. You're the majestic God. You're the holy, separate God. You don't dwell with man." Listen. When did we see you with no place to stay and invite you in? When did we see you poorly clothed and cover you? When did we see you sick and tenderly care for you, or in prison and visit you? And the king will answer, "Don't you know when you cared for one of the least of these, my little ones, my true brothers and sisters, you demonstrated love for me?" How would you demonstrate love for a family member? How would you demonstrate love for a neighbor? How would you demonstrate love for a coworker? I bet it might be different after this Christmas. Mine has forever changed. Recently, I got to go be in another family setting with another person and serve them communion after we had started this. That person hasn't been able to come because of a trach in their throat and a feeding tube. They were part of the furniture here every week. And he got sick and wound up going through just way back in the spring. And I felt like the Lord spoke to my spirit and said, "I don't need a church building to serve communion." So I took communion to him with his trach, his feeding tube, and sitting in a chair. And we talked and then prayed, and I served the bread and the juice. We need to see Christ in the vulnerable, the child, the prisoner, the hungry, the stranger. That's where God chose to appear. We need to participate in God's humility, serving, loving, honoring. Learn to recognize Jesus in the broken, the tears, the fear, and yes, sometimes even what's going on in the violence. So what's our call to action this morning? Examine your heart. Where are we blind to the God who appears in weakness and vulnerability? Francois says this, writer, author of the Mirror Bible, quote, "Live life from a sense of worth rather than deserve basis." Live life from a sense of worth rather than deserve basis. I don't deserve that. I don't deserve this. I'm not good enough. Stop it. You are worthy in Christ. He made you worthy. He is your life, your tears, your brokenness, your shame. So some practical steps. Engage with those who are in need. Worship with an awareness of God's humility. Commit to being present with others as Christ is present in us. I challenge you, every one of you, those of you here, those of you in the live stream, I challenge you. Start seeing everyone through the lens of love, letting go of the habit of categorizing them as believers and unbelievers. Stop it. Embrace the adventure of the good news coming alive in you with feet and your voice and your heart and your hands. God's smallness in the manger and on the cross reveals his infinite love and glory like no other. Father Kenneth Tanner once again, and I quote, "We cannot imagine that the vast universe is held in motion and life by infinite poverty and lowliness, by a love that does not boast or keep a record of wrongs, by a love that knows no envy, by a love that is patient and kind. When we finally see this love face to face, when God's smallness is revealed as the glory behind everything, we will know the worship of the shepherds and the magi and the angels." There's a Lutheran podcaster who 5 years ago started publishing on Stacks. She's edgy. She's an ordained minister, loves music, loves to curse, loves to write about Scripture, loves to preach, drinks. She's amazing. Nadia Bowles-Weber. I want to quote her. It's on the screen. Here's your yearly reminder. There is no resolution that, if kept, will make you more worthy of love. You, as your actual self, and not as some made-up ideal, are already worthy. Let's start 2025 there with the human God.